Stage 1 of the BR6 is finally over, and a lot happened in this stage that we wouldn't have necessarily anticipated. Coming into this stage, Brazil underwent what was arguably the most extreme roster mania, with entire teams being extracted and lifted into another org's realm. This meant that so many teams were undergoing scrutiny and had a lot of eyes on them for their performance. The biggest team that people had their eyes on was definitely FaZe Clan. FaZe adopted the majority of the BR6 winning MIBR roster, while also keeping Astro in their ranks. This alone reunited Astro and Cameraman from their time together previously in FaZe Clan, where they competed from Pro League Season 7 all the way up to Season 11. They kicked the stage off strongly, especially as their arguably hardest matchup against Liquid was in Playday 2, and they won it 8-7. The ingenuity and creativity of FaZe was incredibly apparent as the stage went on, with wild strategies that sometimes paid off spectacularly and sometimes failed miserably. Despite their frontline being immensely strong, much of the true strength of FaZe was facilitated by their support line. Souls, particularly, is an unsung hero of the team, with the highest rating and cost of the team, the highest SRV in the entire region, and a KD of plus 18 to add on. While toe-to-toe with Team Liquid in the top 2 spots of the leaderboard for much of the stage, it was clear that many of FaZe's victories were pretty close. By the end of the stage, they'd been to overtime 3 times, the second highest of all of the Copa Elite 6 qualified teams. Despite FaZe's stumbles at times, they're the prime example of a team who always has something new to try and isn't daunted by the failures they face along the way. Their major adversaries, of course, were Team Liquid, the sweethearts of Brazil. This was one of the few orgs that didn't make any changes to their roster, and after all, why would they? Nesk and Palu are 2 of the most well-respected and feared players in the entire world. PSK, Sexy Cake and Moringa are some of the most effective flex/support players available. The synergy within this team is enough to make anyone jealous, and it's entirely palpable in the way they played this stage. Their superior attacking positioning and coordination, the intricate methods of droning every player and having mass intel, dominant win after dominant win. That is, until they face Black Dragons. A 7-8 overtime loss gave Liquid their closest game this season, and arguably the best game of any 2 teams in this stage. Palu barely showed up statistically, while Nesk ran rampant. It was a loss that ripped the top spot of the leaderboard away from Liquid and handed it back to their rivals of FaZe Clan. A spot that Liquid couldn't regain, as they suffered an even more brutal loss on the final day of the stage, with just a 1-7 scoreline against MIBR on Oregon. Up with Team Liquid and FaZe Clan, we often associate the remainder of the Brazilian top 4 with MIBR and NIP. But both these teams experienced wild ups and downs throughout the course of the stage. With Bodega and Lucid both having to take emergency time off due to COVID, MIBR played their second week with a free agent stand-in, but it didn't stop them from winning both games. And after their coach and star player returned, they only suffered 1 loss, a 5-7 against Team 1 on Coastline in Playday 5, by which time they'd already secured their position in the Copa Elite 6. NIP, however, had a much harder fight. In no single week did NIP win more than 1 game they played, and as a direct result they began flirting too much with the bottom 4 of the standings. The team who had fought all the way to second place in SI 2020 was struggling to perform against teams in their own region. Pino and Muzi still continued to pile on the kills, but Kamikaze came out of the gate struggling, and no one in NIP was particularly impressing with their costs. They had a close overtime game against FaZe on Consulate, which erupted cheers within the NIP fan camp, but later on lost to Ints, the elusive and ever-growing dark horse of the bottom teams. There's been a lot of speculation about NIP holding strats, but leaving it until their very last game to qualify was cutting it a bit fine. But speaking of dark horses anyway, Brazil has had its fair share this stage. Ints were floundering at the bottom of the leaderboard, sitting with 0 points for a solid 7 playdays. It was clear that losing Alamau to Team 1 was a big blow to the team. Hornetau was a great player to fill his shoes, but the pressure was absolutely on, and to rebuild that glue and synergy around him would be hard work. Even as things started going better, disaster struck. VNX, their highest performing player, was off ill, and Ints had to bring in their substitute player Miranda, the first tier 1 female player in the region. They struggled against Furia on Consulate, with Miranda stepping in on hard support, but the team clearly struggling. It was a frustrating 7-5 loss. But the next day, Ince came up against FaZe. It was a matchup that seemed clear-cut in its outcome, and yet took the entire scene by surprise. Facilitated by a role swap that put Miranda on her own preference and had Duds and Drunks fragging, Ince swept FaZe with a 7-5 victory on Clubhouse. After that, wins against NIP and W7M secured Ince 9 points, and while not qualifying them for the Copa Elite 6, it definitely put them on the map. Furia also took the Dark Horse role, except this Dark Horse was out of control and brute forced its way into the limelight. Last year, Furia was struggling at the bottom of the leaderboard, a difference of 1 round being the qualifying factor to kick them into relegations. They saw the rock bottom of the BR6 and clawed their way back in to qualify again for 2021. They made their own roster changes, keeping the core of Lender, Highs and Miracle, and bringing in Rare from their academy team, as well as complete rookie Fantasy, who only turned 18 in March 2021. The doubts were there at the start, but week by week Furia crept their way up the table. 7th by the end of week 1, 6th in week 2, 5th in week 3, and 4th in week 5. Soon enough, Furia were one of the top 4 locked-in teams for the Copa Elite 6, with victories against NIP, Black Dragons, and Team 1, to name a few. They're now one of the only 2 teams, alongside FaZe, who have 3 players in the top 15 rated in the region, and have 12 plants to their name for the stage. Some teams seemed a lot more up and down, like Team 1 and Black Dragons. Team 1 were almost an entirely new roster, with their previous roster being bought by MIBR after they respectively lost their own to FaZe. This meant complete re-synergization from nothing. Alamau was placed in as the ringleader, the epicenter of their new conquest, and Brazilian favourite Lagonis following up the charge with his role on hard support. Team 1's issues smoothed out as the stage went on, and ultimately ended up with an equal number of regulation wins, overtime wins, and overtime losses, showing how close a lot of their games ended up being. They took FaZe all the way on the first Chalet game of the region, but also scrapped just as hard with struggling teams like W7M and Santos. Their last game of the stage was against NIP, and a win would have guaranteed them a spot in the Copa Elite 6. However, their loss meant they needed to wait for Black Dragon's result against Santos. It was a game that should have been entirely in Black Dragon's favour. All they needed was either a win or an overtime loss, and the Copa Elite 6 would have been theirs. And yet they threw it away. A 2-7 loss to Santos on Oregon left the world speechless, especially after their fantastic victory against Team Liquid on the same map just 2 days prior. The fact is, Black Dragons had a bizarre stage. The new home to ex-FaZe players Iron, Live, and Yuna, they exhibited a preference for deep roams, manipulative flanks, and a great confidence and ballsiness in their play. But while it worked on some teams, on others it just got picked apart. FaZe, Furia, and MIBR finished them off in a matter of rounds, while Team 1, Ince, and NIP struggled to put numbers up against them. In fact, Black Dragons only went to overtime once, with all 8 remaining games finishing in regulation. Their failures to secure trades and play from one-dimensional pushes failed them against teams who could easily exploit it. And at the last hurdle, Black Dragons fell. After that, it's just W7M and Santos. Both teams struggled substantially. W7M took weeks to show any kind of impressive play, but even then only finished the stage on 7 points. Not even their push against FaZe was enough, where their clash defenses eluded their opponents, but they couldn't hold up on attack. Santos weren't much better, just 1 point ahead of the bottom spot, but they showed more grit. Their biggest problem was their aversion to vertical play, and their lack of control over map areas that would allow them to sufficiently play it. But they had their moments, and their final victory over Black Dragons certainly showed their promising, albeit slow-going, improvement throughout the course of the stage. So that's the story of Stage 1 of the BR6. A lot of underdog stories and giants falling from grace happened in such a short space of time, and now right now ongoing is the Copa Elite 6, which will culminate on Sunday, where we'll see the champion of the first stage of LATAM. Personally, for me, coming into LATAM this stage, it was something entirely new. I had never really watched much LATAM in the past, but I did have some expectations based on what I'd been told about the past play of many of these teams, And it's safe to say that many of those expectations were just completely dashed. For those of you who maybe didn't watch a ton of LATAM or simply just wanted to catch up with the story, I hope that this was helpful, entertaining, useful, and I hope that you continue to cheer on for your favorite LATAM team going forward in the rest of the year. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.